My name is Claudia, and at 61 years old, I thought I had seen everything life could throw at me. I had built a beautiful beach house in Malibu through 30 years of hard work, sweat, and sacrifice. That house was my sanctuary, my reward for decades of struggle. But one Thursday morning, my son called with news that shattered my world. "Your beach house and car are sold," he said as casually as if he were discussing the weather. "We're leaving tomorrow." In that moment, I realized my own child was trying to steal everything I had worked for. Before we dive into what happened next, I'd love to know where you're watching from. If you've ever trusted someone completely only to have them betray you, hit that like button. And subscribe because the way I handled this situation is something you won't want to miss. Let me take you back to where this all began. I was born in a dusty Arizona town where opportunities were scarce and dreams felt like luxuries we couldn't afford. My father died when I was 12, leaving my mother to raise 3 children on a waitress salary. I watched her work double shifts, her hands rough and calloused, her smile never quite reaching her tired eyes. That image burned itself into my memory. I promised myself I would build a different life. School became my escape and my weapon. While other kids played after class, I studied under the dim light of our kitchen table. My teachers noticed. They encouraged me. When I graduated high school as valedictorian, a full scholarship to UCLA opened doors I had only dreamed about. I chose accounting because it felt solid, dependable, real. College was where I met Paul. He was studying mechanical engineering, tall and quiet, with kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. We met in the library during finals week, both of us exhausted and surviving on terrible coffee. He made me laugh when I needed it most. We dated for a year, and I knew he was the one when he drove 8 hours to Arizona just to meet my mother. We married right after graduation. I was 23, wearing a simple white dress my mother had sewn herself. Paul was 25, nervous and sweet, fumbling with his vows, but meaning every word. We rented a small apartment in Los Angeles, both of us starting our careers, both of us determined to build something lasting. Brandon arrived 2 years later. The moment they placed him in my arms, still red and squalling, I felt my heart expand in ways I hadn't known were possible. Paul cried. We both did. Our son, our future, everything felt perfect. Those first 15 years were good. Paul worked as an engineer for an aerospace company. I climbed the ranks at a mid-sized accounting firm. We bought a modest house in Pasadena. Brandon played Little League. We took vacations to national parks, teaching our son to appreciate nature and hard work. Paul would grill on Sundays while I made potato salad, and Brandon would run around the yard with neighborhood kids. Simple, happy, enough. Then came the accident. A Tuesday evening in March. Paul was driving home from work when a drunk driver ran a red light. The police officer who came to our door had eyes full of sorrow. "Your husband didn't suffer," he said, as if that could somehow make the loss bearable. Brandon was 15. I was 40, and suddenly I was alone. The grief nearly destroyed me. But I had a son to raise, bills to pay, a future to secure. I couldn't afford to fall apart. So I worked. I took a second job stocking shelves at a supermarket from 8 p.m. to midnight. During the day, I managed accounts. At night, I lifted boxes and smiled at customers and pretended I wasn't dying inside. Brandon got into college, UCLA like me. I was so proud. He studied marketing, made friends, seemed to be healing. I worked even harder, determined to give him the opportunities Paul and I had planned together. Every dollar I earned went toward tuition, books, living expenses. I drove a 15-year-old sedan. I packed lunches instead of buying them. I saved every penny. When Brandon graduated, I finally allowed myself to breathe. He found a job at a marketing agency. I got promoted to chief financial officer at a growing tech startup. My salary jumped. For the first time since Paul's death, I wasn't just surviving. I was building wealth. That's when I bought the beach house. I was 50 years old. I had spent 3 decades working myself to exhaustion. I wanted something beautiful, something that was mine, something that felt like victory. The house in Malibu was small, just 2 bedrooms, but it sat on a cliff overlooking the Pacific. The real estate agent quoted me $500,000. I offered $475. We settled at $490. I signed the papers with shaking hands. The first night I spent there, I sat on the deck and watched the sun set over the ocean. Waves crashed against the rocks below. Seagulls called overhead. I thought about Paul, wishing he could see this. I thought about my mother who had passed away 2 years earlier, wishing she could know her daughter had made it. I cried, but They were good tears, earned tears. I also bought myself a used Mercedes C-Class. Nothing flashy, but reliable and comfortable. It felt like a small reward for all those years of sacrifice. Brandon visited often those first few years. He would drive up from Los Angeles on weekends. We would walk on the beach, cook dinner together, talk about his work and his life. He told me he was proud of me. He told me I deserved everything I had. I believed him. Then he met Stephanie. She worked in real estate, sharp and polished with designer clothes and perfect teeth. Brandon was smitten. They dated for a year before he proposed. I attended their wedding at an expensive venue in Beverly Hills. Stephanie's family was wealthy, and they made sure everyone knew it. I felt out of place in my department store dress, but I smiled for my son. After the wedding, things changed subtly at first. Brandon called less often. When we did talk, Stephanie was always there chiming in with comments about investments and property values. She asked pointed questions about my assets. How much is that beach house worth now? Have you thought about your retirement planning? What's your estate plan? I tried to brush it off as concern. Maybe she was just financially minded. But something felt calculating beneath her friendly tone. 6 months into their marriage, Brandon called asking to borrow $5,000. A friend's startup, he said. A great investment opportunity. I transferred the money without hesitation as he was my son. I trusted him. A year later, he needed $10,000 more. Credit card debt, he explained. They had overspent on the wedding and honeymoon. Stephanie got on the phone, assuring me they would pay me back soon. I sent the money, but the repayment never came. When I gently mentioned it, Brandon got defensive. I'll pay you back, Mom. Stop pressuring me. Stephanie added that family should help each other without keeping score. I felt guilty for even bringing it up. The requests continued. Small amounts here and there, a few hundred for car repairs, 1,000 for medical bills. Each time I gave. Each time the money disappeared without acknowledgement or gratitude. Then came the pressure about the house. It was late 2023. Real estate prices in Malibu had skyrocketed. My little beach house purchased for $490,000 was now valued at nearly $2 million. Stephanie started her campaign gently. You should really consider selling Claudia. You're getting older. That house is so much work. Think of what you could do with the money. I refused politely. I love that house. It's my sanctuary. I'm not ready to let it go. But Stephanie was persistent. She sent me articles about downsizing. She talked about assisted living facilities. She painted pictures of a simpler life while conveniently suggesting that Brandon could really use help with a down payment on his own house. Brandon backed her up. Mom, Stephanie's right. You don't need all that space. And honestly, we could use the help. I stood firm. No, that house is mine. I worked my entire life for it. I'm not selling. Their visits stopped. The phone calls became rare and transactional. They only contacted me when they needed something. When I caught a bad flu and spent 2 days in the hospital for dehydration, Brandon sent a text. Get well soon, Mom. That was it. No visit. No flowers. Just 5 words. Stephanie didn't bother to contact me at all. I felt the hurt settle deep in my chest, but I told myself things would improve. I told myself my son still loved me. I told myself I was imagining the coldness. I was wrong. The call came on a Thursday morning in September 2024. I was sitting in my Los Angeles home sipping coffee and reading the newspaper. My phone rang. Brandon's name appeared on the screen. I smiled, hoping maybe he was calling just to talk, to reconnect. Mom, he said, his voice bright with forced cheerfulness. I have great news. I set down my coffee cup, wary of his tone. What's that, honey? Stephanie found a buyer for your beach house. We're selling it for $1.9 million? Isn't that amazing? Also, we sold your Mercedes. Got $40,000 for it. Everything's moving fast, so we need to finalize everything tomorrow. The words hit me like a physical blow. I couldn't breathe. What, Brandon? What are you talking about? He continued as if he hadn't heard the shock in my voice. Don't worry about any of the details, Mom. We're handling everything. The papers are already signed. We're moving the money into a secure account tomorrow. Oh, and Stephanie found this really nice assisted living place in Pasadena. It has gardens and activities. You'll love it. My hands started shaking. Brandon, you can't sell my house. That's my property. You have no right. He laughed. Actually, Mom, we do have the right. Remember last year when you had that gallbladder surgery? You signed power of attorney papers, just in case something happened during the operation. Well, those papers give me legal authority to manage your finances. I felt cold spread through my body. I remembered that day. I had been nervous about going under anesthesia. Brandon had visited me the night before surgery, bringing a stack of documents. Just standard stuff, he had said. Medical directives, power of attorney, just to be safe. I was anxious about the surgery, distracted, trusting. I signed without reading carefully. Now I understood. It had been a trap all along. But those papers were just for emergencies, I managed to say. I'm perfectly fine. I don't need you managing my finances. Brandon's voice took on an edge. Mom, you're 61. You're getting older. We're doing this for your own good. The assisted living facility will be perfect for you. You won't have to worry about maintaining that big house or driving anymore. I'm 61, not 90, I said, my voice rising. I don't need assisted living. I'm healthy and capable. Stephanie's voice came through the speaker. She must have been listening the whole time. Claudia, this is what's best. We've already committed to the buyer. He's paying cash. We close tomorrow at 2 p.m. You can come say goodbye to the house if you want, but the decision is made. Tears burned my eyes. How could you do this? Brandon sighed, sounding annoyed. We're helping you, Mom. You'll understand eventually. We have to go now. Lots to arrange. The line went dead. I sat there, phone still pressed to my ear, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under me. My son, my only child, the boy I had raised alone, sacrificed everything for loved, with every fiber of my being. He was stealing from me. The betrayal felt worse than any physical pain I had ever experienced, worse than losing Paul, because Paul's death was an accident. This was intentional, calculated. My own son had plotted to take everything I had. I tried calling back. Brandon didn't answer. I called Stephanie. She picked up, her voice cold. What is it, Claudia? You can't do this, I said, hearing the desperation in my own voice. That house is all I have. Actually, legally, we can do exactly this. You sign the documents. Brandon is your only heir and your designated power of attorney. We're simply helping you transition to a more appropriate living situation for someone your age. The house sells tomorrow. The car is already gone. I suggest you start packing your personal items. We'll give you a few hours at the house after closing. She hung up. I sat in my quiet kitchen and sobbed. Everything I had worked for. Every sacrifice, every late night, every moment of struggle, all of it about to be ripped away by my own child. But as the tears fell, something else began to grow inside me. Anger. Cold, sharp, clarifying anger. They thought they could do this. They thought I was weak. They thought I would just accept it. They were about to learn exactly how wrong they were. After the initial shock wore off, I forced myself to think clearly. Crying wouldn't solve anything. I needed to understand my legal position and find a way to fight back. I picked up my phone and called Harold Brennan, an old friend from my UCLA days who had become a successful attorney. Harold, I said when he answered, I need your help. It's urgent. We met at his office an hour later. I explained everything. The power of attorney I had signed before surgery. Brandon and Stephanie's plan to sell my house and car, the assisted living facility. Harold listened carefully, his expression growing more serious with each detail. When I finished, he sat back in his leather chair. Claudia, if you signed a valid power of attorney, they might have legal grounds to make financial decisions on your behalf. But let me see the documents. I had grabbed my files before leaving home, including copies of everything I had signed before my surgery. I handed them to Harold. He put on his reading glasses and studied each page carefully. After several minutes, he looked up. This is a very broad power of attorney. It gives Brandon authority to make financial decisions, manage your property, even sell assets. But there's something interesting here. He pointed to a specific clause. The POA only becomes effective if you're deemed incapacitated. That means unable to manage your own affairs due to physical or mental impairment. Are you incapacitated, Claudia? I shook my head firmly. Absolutely not. I'm healthy. I work. I manage my own finances perfectly well. Harold nodded. Then they're potentially committing fraud. If they're using this POA while you're fully competent, the document has no legal authority. We can fight this. Relief washed over me, but Harold held up a hand. However, he continued, legal battles take time. We can file for an emergency injunction to freeze the sale, but that could take a few days. The buyer might back out. There could be complications. I felt frustration building. So what do I do? Harold thought for a moment. Let me draft a cease and desist letter immediately. I'll also contact the escrow company and inform them of the situation. But Claudia, there might be another angle here. Tell me, how is your house titled? I frowned, trying to remember. When I bought it, my estate planning attorney recommended putting it in some kind of trust. For tax purposes, he said, to avoid probate if something happened to me. Harold leaned forward. A trust. What kind, I think it was called? A revocable living trust. Yes, that sounds right. He said it would make things easier for Brandon if I passed away. Harold's eyes lit up. Do you have the trust documents? I pulled out another folder from my bag. I had grabbed everything related to the house. Harold flipped through the pages rapidly, his expression shifting from interest to satisfaction. Claudia, he said, tapping the document, this changes everything. Your house and car are owned by the trust, not by you personally. You are the trustee. That means you control the assets. But here's the crucial part. The power of attorney has no jurisdiction over trust property, only the trustee, which is you can make decisions about trust assets. I stared at him. So Brandon can't sell the house? He cannot. Not without your explicit written consent as trustee. Any sale he's arranged is completely invalid and unenforceable. The relief that flooded through me was immense, but it was quickly followed by something else. A plan began forming in my mind. I thought about Brandon's smug voice on the phone, Stephanie's coldness, the way they assumed I would just accept their betrayal. Harold, I said slowly, what if we don't stop them yet? He raised his eyebrows. What do you mean I want them to think they've succeeded? I want them to show up at that closing tomorrow confident and pleased with themselves. And then I want to pull the rug out from under them in front of everyone. Harold looked uncomfortable. Claudia, that's risky. What if something goes wrong? Nothing will go wrong, I said, feeling more certain with each word. They humiliated me. They tried to steal everything I've worked for. I want them to face the consequences publicly. I want witnesses. I want them to feel exactly what they tried to do to me. Harold studied my face for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. All right, I'll prepare the documentation. But we do this carefully and by the book. We spent the next hour planning. Harold would prepare a formal legal notification for the escrow company explaining that the trust assets could not be sold without my authorization. He would also prepare documents proving my competency, negating any claim that the POA was valid. We would attend the closing together and expose Brandon and Stephanie's scheme in front of the buyer and the escrow officer. But I wanted one more witness, someone whose opinion might actually matter to Stephanie. I called Patricia, Stephanie's mother. Patricia and I had always gotten along. She was a kind woman, a retired teacher, nothing like her calculating daughter. Patricia, I said when she answered, I need to talk to you about something important. Can we meet for lunch tomorrow before the closing? She agreed immediately, concern in her voice. Everything was in place. That night I drove to Malibu. I needed to see my house one more time before the confrontation. I let myself in and walked through each room slowly. The living room where I had read countless books. The kitchen where I had learned to cook elaborate meals just for myself. The deck where I watched sunsets and felt at peace. I thought about Paul. If he were alive, he would be horrified by what Brandon was doing. Paul had been honest and hardworking, a man who believed in earning what you had. He would never have raised a son capable of such betrayal. But he had, or rather I had. Somewhere along the way, despite my best efforts, Brandon had learned to value money over integrity. Had I spoiled him? Protected him too much? Given him everything, without teaching him the value of struggle? These questions plagued me, but I pushed them aside. Tomorrow wasn't about my failures as a mother. Tomorrow was about standing up for myself, about showing Brandon and Stephanie that I wasn't weak or helpless, about reclaiming my dignity. I slept in the beach house that night in the guest room where Brandon used to stay when he visited. The sound of waves lulled me into an uneasy sleep. Friday morning arrived with brilliant California sunshine. I woke early and dressed carefully. Navy blue pantsuit, pearl earrings Paul had given me for our 10th anniversary. Minimal makeup, but enough to look polished and professional. I wanted to appear strong, capable, completely in control. At 11 a.m., I met Patricia at a quiet restaurant in Santa Monica. She hugged me warmly when she arrived, but I could see worry in her eyes. Claudia, What's going on? Is everything all right? I ordered us both coffee and then explained everything. The power of attorney I had signed in good faith, Brandon and Stephanie's plan to sell my house and car without my knowledge or consent, the assisted living facility they had chosen for me. Patricia's face grew paler with each detail. When I finished, she sat back in her chair looking devastated. Stephanie is involved in this. I nodded. I'm sorry, Patricia. I know she's your daughter. But yes, she's been pushing Brandon to do this for months, maybe longer. Patricia closed her eyes. I raised her better than this. I thought I did anyway. This isn't your fault, I said gently, but I wanted you to know. And I wanted to ask if you would come to the closing this afternoon. I'm going to stop this sale. I have legal grounds. But I want witnesses. I want Stephanie to see that her own mother knows what she's doing. Patricia opened her eyes, and I saw steel in them that reminded me she had spent 30 years teaching high school. Of course, I'll be there. Someone needs to hold her accountable. We finished our coffee and went over the plan. Patricia would arrive separately just before the closing. Harold would bring all the legal documentation. I would let Brandon and Stephanie think everything was proceeding smoothly until the perfect moment. At 1:45 p.m., I arrived at the escrow office in Santa Monica. It was a bland, professional building, all beige walls and corporate art. Brandon and Stephanie were already there sitting in the waiting area. Brandon wore a suit that looked new. Stephanie had on an expensive dress and held a designer purse. They looked like they were celebrating. When they saw me, Brandon's face registered surprise, then annoyance. Mom, what are you doing here? I smiled calmly. I wanted to see this through. You were right. It's time to let go of the house. Stephanie's eyes narrowed suspiciously, but she said nothing. The escrow officer, a professional woman in her 40s named Ms. Rodriguez, called us into the conference room. The buyer was already there. Mr. Lawson, a businessman in his early 50s wearing an expensive watch, stood to shake hands. We all sat down around the table. Rodriguez began explaining the process, pulling out document after document. Brandon was practically bouncing in his seat, eager to sign. Stephanie kept her hand on his arm, a smile playing at her lips. Ms. Rodriguez slid the first set of documents toward Brandon. If you'll just sign here, Mr. Thompson, we can begin the transfer process. Brandon picked up the pen. The door opened. Harold Brennan walked in wearing his best courtroom suit, carrying a leather briefcase. Behind him came Patricia, her face set in an expression I'm sure had terrified many students over the years. Brandon dropped the pen. What is this, Mom? What's going on? Harold didn't wait for me to answer. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Harold Brennan, Mrs. Claudia Thompson's attorney. I'm here to inform you that this sale cannot proceed. Ms. Rodriguez looked confused. I don't understand. We have all the proper documentation. The power of attorney is in order. Harold set his briefcase on the table and opened it with deliberate calm. Actually, the documentation is not in order. Let me explain. He pulled out a folder and handed copies to Ms. Rodriguez and Mr. Lawson. The property in question, located at 1247 Pacific Coast Highway, Malibu, is not owned by Mrs. Thompson personally. It is held in a revocable living trust established in 2014. Mrs. Thompson is the trustee of this trust. As such, only she has the authority to sell trust assets. He laid out the trust documents, each page marked with colored tabs. The power of attorney being used by Mr. Brandon Thompson has no jurisdiction whatsoever over trust property. Trust assets can only be managed by the designated trustee. Any attempt to sell trust property using a power of attorney is invalid and unenforceable under California law. Mr. Lawson stood up abruptly. Is this true? I've paid earnest money on this property. Harold nodded sympathetically. You'll receive a full refund of your earnest money, Mr. Lawson. This is not your fault. You were provided with fraudulent information about who had the authority to sell. Brandon's face had gone from confident to pale. This is insane. Mom, tell them you agreed to this. I stood up slowly, looking directly at my son. I never agreed to this, Brandon. You and Stephanie tried to steal my home. You used the power of attorney I gave you in case of emergency during surgery to commit fraud. Stephanie jumped in, her voice sharp. This is ridiculous. We were helping you, Claudia. You're too old to manage that house. Patricia's voice cut through the room like ice. Stephanie Marie, be quiet. Stephanie turned to her mother, clearly shocked to see her there. Mom, what are you doing here? I asked her to come. I said, because I wanted her to see exactly what kind of person you've become. Harold continued, his lawyer voice steady and authoritative. Furthermore, the vehicle in question, the 2012 Mercedes C-Class, is also titled within the trust. Any sale of that vehicle is equally invalid. Mr. Thompson and Ms. Thompson will need to return the vehicle and any money received from its sale immediately. Ms. Rodriguez looked overwhelmed. She turned to Brandon. Mr. Thompson, did you know the property was in a trust? Brandon opened and closed his mouth several times. I thought the power of attorney covered everything. Harold shook his head. A basic principle of estate law powers of attorney do not grant authority over trust assets. If you had consulted an attorney before attempting this sale, you would have known that. Mr. Lawson gathered his papers. I'm leaving. My attorney will be in contact regarding the return of my earnest money and any additional damages. He walked out without another word. Ms. Rodriguez looked uncomfortable. I'll need to terminate this transaction immediately. I'll prepare cancellation documents. Brandon tried one more time. Mom, please. This is a misunderstanding. We can work this out. I looked at my son, really looked at him. I saw desperation there and fear, but I didn't see remorse. I didn't see love. I saw someone who had been caught and was scrambling to escape consequences. This isn't a misunderstanding, Brandon. You knew exactly what you were doing. You've been planning this for months. The loans you never repaid. The pressure to sell. Getting me to sign that power of attorney. It was all leading to this moment. Stephanie stood up, her face flushed with anger. You're overreacting. We were going to give you some of the money. We weren't stealing everything. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. How generous. You were going to give me some of my own money. Patricia walked over to Stephanie. How could you do this? Claudia has been nothing but kind to you. She welcomed you into her family, and this is how you repay her. Stephanie's composure cracked. Mom, you don't understand the whole situation. I understand perfectly, Patricia said. You saw an opportunity to profit from someone's trust and you took it. I raised you better than this. I'm ashamed of you. She turned to Brandon. And you. Your mother raised you alone after your father died. She worked herself to the bone to give you opportunities. This is how you thank her. Brandon looked down at the table, unable to meet her eyes. Harold pulled out another document. Mrs. Thompson, what would you like to do? We can file criminal charges for attempted fraud and elder abuse. Brandon's head shot up. Elder abuse. Mom, please. Don't do this. I'm your son. I felt tears threatening, but forced them back. A son doesn't do this to his mother. A son doesn't try to take everything she's worked for and put her in a facility against her will. I turned to Harold. I don't want to press charges, but I want it clear that Brandon and Stephanie are never to contact me again. I want restraining orders if necessary, and I want the power of attorney revoked immediately. Harold nodded. I'll prepare the paperwork. Brandon stood up, his voice breaking. Mom, please. I made a mistake. I'm sorry. Stephanie grabbed his arm. Brandon, let's go. She's not worth this. That was the moment that sealed it for me. Not worth this. I had given my son life, love, every opportunity, and his wife thought I wasn't worth basic human decency. Get out, I said quietly. Both of you. Get out of my sight. Stephanie pulled Brandon toward the door. He looked back once, but I turned away. I couldn't bear to see him. Not then. Maybe not ever. Patricia stayed behind. She hugged me tightly. I'm so sorry, Claudia. If I had known what they were planning. You couldn't have known, I said. Thank you for being here. She nodded and left, promising to call me later. Harold and I spent another hour with Ms. Rodriguez ensuring all the documentation was properly filed. The sale was officially terminated. My house remained mine. My car, which Stephanie had apparently not yet actually sold but had only accepted a deposit on, remained mine. Everything was back under my control. When we finally left the escrow office, the sun was setting. Harold walked me to my car. You did the right thing, he said. Standing up for yourself, not letting them get away with this. I nodded, feeling exhausted. Will you help me revoke the power of attorney and set up better protections? Absolutely. Come to my office Monday. We'll make sure nothing like this can ever happen again. I drove home to Los Angeles, not to the beach house. I needed familiar surroundings. I needed to process what had just happened. The weekend passed in a blur of emotions. Anger, sadness, relief, vindication. I felt all of them in waves that left me exhausted. Harold called Saturday morning to confirm that Miss Rodriguez had filed all the proper termination paperwork. The sale was completely void. Mr. Lawson's earnest money would be returned. Brandon and Stephanie had no legal recourse. On Sunday, I received an email from Patricia. She wrote that she had spoken with Stephanie at length. Patricia had told her daughter in no uncertain terms that she was cutting off all financial support until Stephanie made amends. Patricia also apologized again for not seeing what was happening sooner. I wrote back thanking her and assuring her this wasn't her responsibility. Stephanie was an adult who made her own choices. Brandon started texting me Sunday evening. "Mom, please talk to me. I'm sorry. I made a terrible mistake. Please give me a chance to explain." I didn't respond. There was nothing to explain. The facts were clear. Monday morning, I met Harold at his office. We spent 3 hours going through my entire estate plan. First, we officially revoked the power of attorney I had given Brandon. Harold prepared new documents designating himself as my attorney, in fact effective only if I became truly incapacitated. We built in safeguards. 2 doctors would have to certify my incapacity before the POA could be activated. Next, we revised my trust. I removed Brandon as beneficiary. Instead, I designated a portion of my estate to go to a charity supporting widowed mothers. Another portion would establish a scholarship fund for students from low-income families. The remainder would go to cover my own care needs for as long as I lived. "Harold," I asked, as we signed the final documents, "am I being too harsh?" He looked at me seriously. "Claudia, what Brandon and Stephanie attempted was criminal. You could have pressed charges. You chose not to. But you're also choosing not to reward them for trying to steal from you. That's not harsh. That's reasonable." I nodded, feeling some of the guilt ease. Over the next 2 weeks, Brandon's attempts to contact me escalated. Texts became phone calls. When I didn't answer, he showed up at my Los Angeles house. I watched through the window as he knocked on the door calling for me. "Mom, please, let me explain. I love you. Please don't cut me out of your life." I wanted to open the door. Every maternal instinct screamed at me to forgive him, to hold him, to make things right. But I remembered his voice on that phone call, the casual way he had announced he was stealing my house and car, the complete lack of concern for my well-being. That wasn't love. That was entitlement. After 30 minutes, he left. He came back 3 more times over the next week. Each time I stayed inside. Each time he eventually left. The text stopped. The call stopped. I heard through Patricia that Brandon and Stephanie's marriage was falling apart. Stephanie had filed for divorce. She blamed Brandon for the failed plan and for losing her mother's financial support. Brandon was living alone in a small apartment, working long hours to cover debts they had accumulated. I began spending more time at the beach house. I joined a yoga class in Malibu and met a woman named Grace. She was 63, also widowed, with a sharp sense of humor and a love of hiking. We started walking together on the beach every morning, talking about books and life and the challenges of aging alone. Grace knew about Brandon. I told her everything one morning as we watched dolphins play in the waves. She listened without judgment and then said something that stuck with me. "You know what takes real strength? Not the forgiving part. Anyone can forgive. Real strength is knowing when forgiveness would just enable more harm. You protected yourself. That's brave." I thought about that often. By early December, I had settled into a new routine. Work part-time as a financial consultant, morning beach walks with Grace, evenings reading on my deck, yoga twice a week, volunteering at a local women's shelter on Saturdays. My life was full and peaceful. I was not in assisted living. I was not dependent or helpless. I was thriving. 6 months after the confrontation at the escrow office, I sat on my deck watching the sunset. It was March, and spring flowers bloomed in the garden I had planted along the side of the house. The ocean stretched endlessly before me, constant and beautiful. I thought about everything that had happened: the betrayal, the fight, the victory, the loss. I had saved my house and my independence, but I had lost my son. Or maybe I had never really had him the way I thought I did. Maybe the Brandon I believed I knew was an illusion, and the real Brandon had been there all along, just hidden beneath my hopeful expectations. Patricia had called me last week with an update. Brandon's divorce from Stephanie was finalized. He had lost his job due to poor performance and was working as a freelance marketer, struggling to make ends meet. He had asked Patricia if she thought I would ever forgive him. I didn't know the answer to that question. Forgiveness felt like something distant, something I might reach someday but couldn't quite grasp yet. The wounds were still too fresh, the sense of betrayal too deep. What I did know was this: I had learned to trust my instincts. When something felt wrong, it probably was. I had learned to protect myself even from people I loved. I had learned that love without respect is hollow. I had learned that I was stronger than I thought, that I could stand up for myself even when it hurt, that I deserved to keep what I had earned. My beach house represented more than property. It represented decades of sacrifice, determination, resilience. It represented my refusal to be a victim. It represented my right to live life on my own terms. Grace appeared at my gate waving. "Ready for dinner?" she called. We were driving into town for Italian food at our favorite restaurant. I stood up, stretching. "Yes, give me 2 minutes." As I gathered my keys and purse, I glanced at my phone. No messages from Brandon. There hadn't been any in weeks. Perhaps he had finally accepted that I meant what I said. Perhaps he was working on becoming a better person. I hoped so for his sake. But his journey was no longer my responsibility. My responsibility was to myself, to honor the life I had built, to protect the peace I had found, to live fully and freely in this beautiful house by this beautiful ocean. I locked the door and walked to Grace's car. She asked about my week, and I told her about a new consulting client and a particularly challenging yoga pose I had finally mastered. We laughed about getting older and agreed that 60 was underrated. The restaurant was lovely. The food was excellent. I drove home along the coast highway as the moon rose over the water, feeling content. Back at the house, I made tea and sat on the deck one more time. The waves whispered against the shore. Stars emerged in the darkening sky. I thought about Paul and hoped he would be proud of how I had handled things. I thought about my mother and knew she would understand. She had been strong too, stronger than anyone gave her credit for. I had inherited that strength, and when Brandon and Stephanie tried to take everything from me, I had used it. Not with violence or cruelty, but with knowledge and courage. I had stood my ground. I had protected what was mine. I had refused to be diminished. They thought they could take my house, my car, my independence, my dignity. But they forgot something crucial. They forgot that I had survived 61 years of challenges. They forgot that I had raised a child alone while working multiple jobs. They forgot that I had built a career and a life through sheer determination. They forgot that I was not weak. And this house, this beautiful house by the sea, would remain mine, not because I was lucky, not because someone gave it to me, but because I had earned it, because I had fought for it, because I deserved it. The moon climbed higher, the ocean sang its eternal song, and I sat in my home finally at peace with everything I had lost and everything I had kept. I was free, truly, completely free. And that freedom was worth more than any relationship built on lies and manipulation. It was worth more than maintaining a false peace. It was worth everything. So here's my question for all of you watching this. Have you ever had to stand up to someone you love because they were taking advantage of you? How did you find the courage? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted completely, please hit that like button. Subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength in difficult situations. Share this with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to protect yourself even from family. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it reminds you that you are stronger than you think, braver than you believe, and worthy of respect. Take care of yourselves. Protect what you've earned and never let anyone make you feel small. Until next time, stay strong.